gingerbread man drawing. Right? So if you have your brain and your spinal cord, right, we're talking about central nervous system, the upper motor neurons are the ones that are up at the top in your cortex, right? The lower motor neurons are the ones that take that information from the primary motor cortex and take it out to the bicep, right, or to the wherever. So the upper motor neuron is the one that's stuck in your brain, initiating the signal. The lower motor neuron is the one that leaves through the spinal cord and goes to where it needs to go, right? So it's going to go to the peripheral nervous system. Notice it goes to the opposite sides of the body, right? Everything crosses over. We'll look at that lateralization in a little bit. Association areas, right? There's something called the frontal eye fields. The frontal eye fields interpret which each individual eye sees. You have areas on your occipital lobe, right? Occipital lobe is vision. Areas on your occipital lobe that say this is what the right side sees, this is what the left eye sees, and then guess what? You have a visual association area that puts them together, right? And so that's how you see. We'll look at the process of vision eventually. That visual association area for our special senses. So we can add that to our chart here. Visual. Right, this is just interpreting vision. Right, this is putting the colors together. This is naming the object, recognizing the face, right? Visual association. There's also a primary auditory cortex with an auditory association. If your mom was in the back of the room, would you recognize her voice? If you would, it's that association area. Jane, I can hear her. Right? That's because that association area. Right? You have a gustatory information processing area, right? Processing the taste. This is how you recognize things. Oh, that tasted like fish, right? Whatever. Right? You recognize, you associate. You have sensory areas for your sense of smell and special areas for your sense of balance. And so we'll look at all of those when we do special senses. Notice also we have something called Wernicke's area, something called Broca's area. These are other special association areas that we'll get to in just a minute. This is showing you relatively where they are. I'm not going to give you a diagram in lecture and say, what area is this? In lab, eventually, there's a colored brain that has all of these things on it. You'll learn it and know it in lab when we get there. So Broca's area is another association area. This is purely dedicated to language. So Broca's area, this is producing speech sounds. Wernicke's area is understanding the language. So this is why speech is so complex. And if you think about it, I mean, yes, other animals communicate, but they don't have speech, right? They might produce sounds, right? Clicking, hooting, howling, whatever, but they don't articulate the way we do because we have very complex areas of our brain, Broca's and Wernicke's area. They're usually on the same side of the brain that do this. One is just for making the sounds, moving your lips, moving your tongue. That's pretty complex stuff. Opening and closing your mouth as you speak, regulating your breathing as you speak, right? All of that, and actually understanding what you're saying or understanding words as they come in. So I'm just going to write B and W just because I'm running out of room. But that's what I mean by that. Broca's and Wernicke's area, right? Understanding how to make the speech and what the speech is saying, what the language means. The prefrontal cortex is the most complex part of our brain in terms of what it is. So it is on the frontal cortex, but the prefrontal cortex is the most frontal part. So it's the part that's right up front. And this is where you decide to do things. This is where you decide to put your pen down, give up, and put your head down. Right? This is where you decide, you know what? We're almost done with this semester, and I'm giving it my all. Right? This is where you decide, I really have to pee after class, right? That's all of that, right? This is that prefrontal cortex. Your decision making, your personality, what are you going to do? The parietal and temporal association areas, these give some, they're mostly for our special senses actually, but they also give some like spatial relationships and things like that, like where you are and how close you are to people and that type of a thing. So that was all cortex stuff, right? Outer cortex stuff, the outer edges of the brain. On the inside of our brain, we have something called the basal nuclei. So it's actually part of our cerebrum, the basal nuclei. Remember the word nuclei means a cluster of cell bodies in the central nervous system. So here we have a cluster of cell bodies in the central nervous system that we're calling the basal nuclei. These basal nuclei, and you don't have to know the names of them, so we're crossing those three off. These basal nuclei do background patterns of movement. So they don't initiate movement. Let me give you an example. I'm standing, and I'm going to decide to walk because it makes me feel awkward to stand in one place and talk. So that's why I kind of walk back and forth, right? So now I decide to walk. Now I'm walking, but I'm not thinking about walking. I'm just doing it, right? My basal nuclei have taken over, right? And now I'm focusing on what I'm saying and what I'm doing with my hands and where my hair is, right? Things like that. I'm not thinking about where my feet are because my basal nuclei are taking care of that for me. Your basal nuclei do background patterns of movement, things that you don't have to consciously think about. When you walk upstairs, you don't have to think flex, extend, lift, push, flex, extend, right? You don't have to think those things. You just walk up the stairs because your basal nuclei do it for you. You can do other things. You can multitask now, right? You can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can walk and talk. You can walk and text, right? Because your basal nuclei have your back, right? They're doing those background patterns of movement. And so that's what they're doing. And again, you can cross this off. All it is understanding that the basal nuclei take care of those background movements. So there are fibers connecting parts of our brain together. So no part of our brain works in isolation. When we say fibers connecting parts of your brain together, literally they're nerve fibers. So there's special fibers, special white matter fibers, right? White matter is myelinated axons that go from the frontal cortex to the parietal cortex, that go from the frontal cortex to the insula, that go from the insula to the temporal, right? They're connecting different areas of the brain. And this makes sense because your brain has to understand the big picture in order to make the best decisions for your survival. And so, likewise, tracts coming up from the cerebellum go up to your frontal cortex, right? Tracts coming up from your diencephalon go up to your cerebellum. They cross over in different parts of the brain and different lobes. Commissural fibers are the fibers that connect right and left hemispheres. They connect right. This is how the right side of your body knows what the left side of your body is doing, right? That's why, because you have this crossing over. It's called the corpus callosum. It's a special band of fibers that cross from right to left and left from right. It goes both ways. Connecting both sides of the brain. The corpus callosum connects both sides of the brain. Projection fibers are ones that project into other parts of the brain. Projection fibers connect one hemisphere with other parts of the brain in the same hemisphere, I should say. So they project on the same side. Projection fibers. Whereas association fibers are just connecting and restricting parts of a single hemisphere, right? Or connecting the things within a single lobe. The association fibers are very small. Association fibers are just making one small little jump from one part of the frontal lobe to another part of the frontal lobe. Projection fibers going down or coming up. Our commissural fibers are crossing over. This is showing you a picture of where they are. There's no way I could draw this, so I didn't even try. Right. So we see the corpus callosum, the commissural fibers, our projection fibers going in all different ways. Whoops. And then the small association fibers just connecting sections of the same lobe and the same hemisphere. So, pathways, let's kind of link this back and talk about pathways for a minute. Pathways for action potentials from one part of the brain to another, right? We're taking it back to action potentials. The action potential originates in the gray matter. I'm not making a sequence chart of this because at this time you should look at something like this with numbers and say, bam, I should be making a sequence chart, right? Go back in your notes. Put each step on a note card. Shuffle up the note cards. Do you understand what it means? Maybe draw a picture with it, right? So I'm going to walk you through the steps, but I'm going to strongly suggest you do something more with this slide than just look at it, right? Action potential starts in the gray matter, up at the top, right? Sent to another area of the gray matter by projection fibers, because that's what projection fibers do. They project to other areas of the brain, further down, right? Action potential comes from up top, goes further down. The second new action potential comes from that gray matter, right, that cell body, and now it's going to spread by association fibers. Now we're communicating amongst other parts of that same general area. What exactly is going on? Hey, we're about to move our bicep right now, right? This stuff happens in like a fraction of a millisecond. The third action potential is generated, travels to the other side, commissural fibers. Bam! Because one side of the brain needs to know what the other side of the brain's doing. It starts at the top, it goes down, it crosses over. The signals are always traveling to both sides and to the general area that surrounds that particular gray matter, that surrounds those particular cells that are involved. Right? So I would encourage you to think about this logically and see if you can replicate what it's saying. See if you can draw it. So I'll give you an example, kind of get you started. Right? I would start with however crappy of a brain you draw, it doesn't matter, right? The idea is that you understand what it is. You understand that the gray matter's here, right, along the outside. And so what it's saying is action potential originates in the gray matter. Start an action potential in the gray matter. Boom, here it is. That's where it's starting. From there, right? Maybe even label it number 1. From there, it goes to another area of the gray matter by projection fibers. Boom. Maybe it's going there, 2. And then you can label that projection fiber. See what I mean? Actually drawing it out will help you understand it. Okay. I mean, it's right here too, but drawing it's much better. All right. The limbic system is probably the coolest area of the brain. So the limbic system is all of our memory. The limbic system is our emotion. The limbic system is really complex. This is our learning, our memory, our emotions, and a lot of our behavior. This is our love. This is our hate. This is our sadness. All right here in one little part of the brain. And so this is actually a functional system. It's not a structural system. So it's not like I could hold up a picture of the brain and say, this right here is the limbic system. Because it's actually a bunch of different parts of the brain that work together to create this system. So it's not just a single location. You can't really point to it. It's a bunch of parts of the brain working together to give you your emotions, your memory. This is only in mammal brains. So you can look at a fish or a bird brain, and you're not going to see the limbic system. The 3 parts of our limbic system are the lobe, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. So the hippocampus, this is our memory and learning. The amygdala is our emotions and the expression of emotions. Expression of emotions. I said expressing. The expression of emotions, right? Crying, love, that pitter-patter of your heart when you see your love walking across the room, right? All of those things, right? What happens? Your palms get sweaty. Your heart might race a little bit. Maybe you get a smile on your face. Maybe your pupils dilate, right? All of those things, all initiated from your amygdala. So these are the structures involved in your limbic system. But we didn't write them on our chart because it's not a structure. It's not one thing, right? It's a bunch of things that work together. So we'll stop there, and we'll continue with our graphic organizer on Tuesday when I see you again. And so I do have your exams if you want to check them out. You can see them. And yeah.